Rob McLeod began every morning by looking at his daughter's website. She had disappeared in August 2003, a spirited, beautiful young woman who was 19 at the time. This tragedy was a cruel ordeal for the missing girl's parents, but it turned out she was far from the only victim in the story of a dangerous criminal. Today, we want to tell the story of the innocent victims of an incredibly dangerous man who hid his cruelties behind his cooperation with law enforcement agencies. Casey McLeod was born in 1984 in the state of Colorado. Her parents' names were Rob and Lori McLeod. Having had a child during their marriage, they devoted all their warmth and care to their daughter. Until her adolescence, the girl grew up carefree, completely shielded from the dangers and difficulties of the modern world. However, this carefree life of Casey did not last long. Later, her parents divorced, and she lived with her mother from then on. Her father often communicated with her during this time. The girl was 4 years old then. She was a cheerful, happy, bright child. The boundless love and care of her mother and father led, as she grew older, to a spoiled, unruly character that manifested itself during puberty. In high school, the girl fell into bad company, began smoking, quarreled with her mother, and behaved inappropriately. It was a rebellious teenage spirit that was received extremely negatively by her mother. The woman was tired of arguing with her daughter. At some point, she couldn't take it anymore, packed her daughter's things, and moved with her to Arizona to let her live with her aunt for a while. Casey's new home was Phoenix. Here, her behavior normalized. The girl met Tobita Martin, with whom she got along well, and over time they became best friends. At this point, they were both 16 years old. From the first days of their friendship, the girls understood each other perfectly. They were very close, went to school together, worked together in a restaurant, and spent almost all their free time together. According to Tobita, her friend got into bad company after graduation. There, she became addicted to smoking and began bringing dubious characters home. When her best friend Tobita noticed this, she called her aunt, with whom Casey was living, and told her about the problems. She then informed her mother, who immediately got into her car and drove to her daughter's house. The contact between her and Tobita did not break off but became even stronger. Tobita was very worried about her friend, so they remained in constant contact and cared for each other, even when they were far apart. As it turned out, Casey had been smoking illegal substances for months. In her opinion, she was a victim of circumstances, unlike ordinary addicts. She believed that she would be able to get her problem under control. After living with her father for several months, she came to her senses and returned to her mother. It turned out that during the time Casey was being cared for by her father, her mother had met a new man named Scott and was with him. This man was charming, loving, and caring. Life seemed to be getting better, and they began to live together. She got a new job and had long since separated from her bad company, in which she had been addicted to drugs. But after some time, the lie was uncovered. The parents found illegal substances in the house, and there was a serious conflict between them and their daughter. Casey claimed that she was not taking drugs, but that they apparently came from her old stash. The now 19-year-old young woman was convincing in her words and even agreed to undergo a test, but her parents could no longer believe the young rebel with addiction problems. The mother and stepfather threatened their daughter with turning her over to the police. There was a heated argument, whereupon Casey grabbed her bicycle and rode off to an unknown destination and did not return for a long time. The mother was worried. She drove around searching for her daughter but could not find her. This time, however, she had not just run away without reason, but after a serious argument. She had had similar outbursts of anger and tantrums before, which greatly upset her parents, but she always came back quickly. This time, her mother's heart felt that something disturbing had happened. Casey's biological father, Rob, learned from his ex-wife that his daughter had disappeared. The man was very worried, as he also participated in the search for his daughter, and just wanted her to come home as she had done before. However, 2 days had already passed, and Casey had still not returned. She didn't even show up for her shift at the diner where she worked. This finally worried the parents so much that Lori and Rob involved the police. Contrary to expectations, the police officers were not in a hurry to start searching for the missing woman. The police told the parents that they actually had no right to search for their daughter, that she was already 19 years old and could leave the house at will. She could do whatever she wanted and was not considered missing, according to the police. To file a missing person report, there must be suspicion that someone has committed a crime. The investigators believed that Casey was somewhere with friends and would return later, and they did not want to waste their resources on a troubled teenager. This police response left the family of the missing girl at a dead end. The only support the worried mother still had was her partner, Scott. It turned out that he had connections to law enforcement because the man was an FBI informant and helped catch criminals. When Lori talked to Scott about her daughter, he assured her that she would definitely be found. The man used his connections and actually helped Lori. The police finally began to investigate Casey's disappearance, and some clues were found, including the discovery that the missing Casey had returned to her mother's house after her disappearance when no one was there. This was confirmed by a necklace that had been left on the doorknob of her bedroom. She always carried it with her. She had disappeared and then suddenly reappeared. Later, the stepfather also spoke with neighbors, and one of them said she had seen the missing girl just a few days after her disappearance. The neighbor confirmed that she had seen her in the company of Casey herself, her boyfriend, and the sister of the boyfriend. During this time, Tobita, the best friend of the missing girl, also participated in the search. She called everyone who might know Casey, but no one had seen her. Tobita traveled to the city where Casey lived and participated in the search operation organized by the relatives of the missing girl. Then she set up a social media page for her friend to receive information about her. Tobita also shared flyers with pictures of her best friend that described her. The mother was so grateful to her new lover for his involvement and help in the search that she agreed to marry him, for he was her only hope and support in a difficult moment, and they began to live like a real family. The man continued to support Lori and kept her going. They made every possible effort to search for her. In this state, weeks and then months passed. It took over a year to realize that Casey had not really run away. Everyone was already sure that something much worse had happened to her. Tobita was sure that her friend had had an accident and was in trouble because otherwise she would have contacted her at the first opportunity. They had a close friendship and had never fallen out to the point where the relationship had broken down. Casey would not have ignored her. During this time, the mother of the missing girl also began to describe the worst scenarios that could have happened to her daughter. At this point, the father of the young, rebellious Casey and her best friend were frequently calling each other and analyzing various possibilities, and they began to wonder whether the key to Casey's disappearance might be closer to her home and family than previously assumed. They had their first suspicions. The questions that occupied Rob McLeod were where his daughter was, whether she was okay, and whether it made sense to wait for her at home. What the man did not know was that another father from Colorado named Howard Emery had exactly the same feelings. He lived near their city and had lost contact with his daughter in a similarly mysterious way, but much earlier than Casey disappeared. His daughter was named Len Emery and disappeared at the age of 24, only 7 months before Casey's disappearance. Howard went over the events in his head that had preceded the incidents. His daughter had been an excellent student. She had even managed to graduate from high school a year earlier than planned and went to college, where she stood out for her intellectual abilities. But then the young woman began to have difficulties. Her mother had health problems that prevented her from finishing college. Len had to take care of her mother and help her, so she dropped out of her studies. She also lost her promising job as a veterinary assistant, and her life went downhill. But at that time, nothing mattered to her except her mother's health. She dreamed of making her mother healthy again, and then planned to get her other problems under control, resume her studies, and find a new job. But life held new surprises for her. The compliant Len met an abusive boyfriend and fell completely under the influence of the manipulator. She married him. Her husband beat her, gave her no opportunity to communicate with her family, and kept her completely under control. According to the father, the daughter began to have psychological problems during this time due to this series of failures and manipulations by her husband. The woman believed she was nothing and could not achieve what she dreamed of. Her husband suppressed Len and reduced her self-esteem to a minimum. In the end, however, the woman found the strength and left the domestic tyrant. Her marriage broke up in 2002, but that didn't make things any easier. Len's father was worried that his daughter began a relationship with another bad guy, an ex-convict named Stephen Hawley. At the same time, Len became interested in caving. This became a mental outlet for her and an opportunity to find something new and change her life from scratch. On January 16, 2003, Len set off in her car from her parents' house on a trip. She wanted to go with her friends to Mexico to do speleology with a group of professionals. However, only 2 weeks passed, and Len's father received a call from the sheriff's office of Utah. The man was informed that his daughter's car had been found off the highways in a canyon. The car could be identified by the license plate, as the owner had a great fondness for Dalmatian dogs, which was also reflected in the unique inscription on the license plate. According to the police officer, most of his daughter's belongings were still in the car, Len's clothing and everything else, including equipment, but there was no trace of the woman. That seemed disturbing enough. The sheriff told Howard everything he could find out during the investigation of the scene. It looked as if Len had deliberately driven off the road and directly into the canyon. There were a series of boot prints and tire tracks from another vehicle. Everything indicated that the young caver had gotten out of her car and into another one. However, some of the tracks were trampled, as if some kind of struggle had taken place here. The sheriff suspected that something might have happened to the woman, as if she had been kidnapped. Howard rushed to the police station to report his daughter's disappearance near his home in Colorado. However, the man was also turned away, as they believed that his daughter was just having fun somewhere and would return home later. Therefore, the father was forced to conduct his own investigations. The man first checked the transaction history of the woman's bank card and collected all the other data he could find. Based on the payment records, he was able to reconstruct her route, where she had traveled in the weeks before the call from the police station. Howard was confused, as everything indicated that she was leading a double life. She had not traveled to Mexico, but had spent the 10 days before the call traveling around the western states. During this time, she had issued numerous forged checks and spent thousands of dollars using her father's credit card. This was completely uncharacteristic of Len. She was frugal and modest in her expenses, and the card had been given to her by her father for emergencies when she might need money. Therefore, the man was sure that she was either being blackmailed or intimidated through threats, or that the money from the card had been withdrawn by someone else. The daughter simply could not have done all this alone and spent so much money. Howard was able to access her email account during his investigation and found out that Len had sent several emails to her cousin a few days before her departure. There were hints of problems, but Len assured her cousin that she was protected by a certain Hannibal and that everything was okay. The father didn't understand at all who they were talking about. At that time, her boyfriend Stephen, whom the woman had met after separating from her abusive husband, was still in prison, where he was serving a sentence for illegal substance trafficking. The father visited Stephen in prison to talk to him. Perhaps he could give him some clues. The friend told him that Hannibal was the nickname of one of his acquaintances, and he was a very violent man. If Len got involved with him, she was in great danger. He immediately advised him to notify the police. Hannibal was a former cellmate of his. He could kill a person very quickly and easily, and he knew many people who would not hesitate to kill the woman on his behalf. However, the friend of the missing woman refused, despite the father's pleas, to reveal the identity of this mysterious Hannibal, as he feared for his life. The alarmed Howard then did not turn to the police, who ignored his statement, but to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He told the FBI agents everything he knew about Hannibal, but they didn't believe him either, as they thought everything was just made up. The father's concerns were once again ignored, and the FBI did not pursue the case of the missing 24-year-old woman. Both fathers continued their own investigations. The discovery of Hannibal's mysterious identity, however, gave these independent investigations new impetus. Later, it turned out that this mysterious stranger worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation and was married to Lori McLeod, the mother of the missing Casey. It turned out that Hannibal's real name was Scott Kimball. Even Lori herself had begun to suspect his involvement in her daughter's disappearance at that time. Her doubts emerged only much later after the wedding. From time to time, he made eerie jokes and said strange things that scared the woman, and she had questions for her new husband. Lori often had the feeling that something was wrong with her new husband. He gave confusing answers to all questions related to the missing daughter, and then the woman found Scott's work uniform and Casey's personal diary while searching his things, which should not have been in his possession. Amazingly, it took a whole 6 months before the ex-wife informed Rob McLeod that Casey had not only been missing for an entire weekend when she was last seen, but that Scott himself had left on the same days, which later led her to suspect his involvement in the possible crime. These were not the only events related to the man that worried those who knew him. At the beginning of 2006, he was involved in a criminal case being investigated in Lafayette, Colorado. The police first became aware of him when they were investigating a case of check fraud. Scott had connections to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, as he was a criminal informant. Furthermore, it turned out that the man was a con artist who had spent most of his life in prisons in the western United States. However, it was not possible to catch Hannibal while he was on the run. A warrant would have been issued for the arrest of the suspected informant, but it took more than 2 months to track the man down. The arrest required participation in a massive chase that took place along the Coachella Valley in California. The criminal could finally be stopped and arrested. The experienced criminal, however, did not want to give up even when he was handcuffed. Unfortunately, the investigations into the involvement of the prisoner in several cases of the disappearance of young women did not begin immediately after the investigators' work. Another name was added to the list of missing persons in which the man might be involved. The name of the third missing person was Jennifer Markham. She had disappeared several years earlier from the view of family and friends. It also happened in Colorado. The 25-year-old Jennifer Markham was a single mother who earned her living as a dancer in a nightclub. She was waiting for her imprisoned boyfriend from places not too far away. His name was Steve Ennis. Shortly after this event, Jennifer also disappeared. Her father, Bob, did not understand what had happened to his daughter, but suspected that Jenny might have been in trouble or even behind bars. Only a year after the police report did her father receive a call from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, informing him that his daughter might be in trouble. She herself had not yet been found, but her car had been found abandoned at Denver Airport. The parents found out that the authorities had discovered the woman's car much earlier than they had been told. They continued to demand answers from the investigators, and then Jennifer's mother was given the opportunity to contact Scott Kimball. The informant said that the daughter of the Markhams had been killed by an illegal drug dealer who was involved with her boyfriend. He said the missing woman had been tied up and strangled. But the most frightening thing was the end of the conversation with Scott. He said he could take the mother of the murdered woman to the mountains the next day and show her where her body was. However, the parents of the missing woman did not accept this offer. They were afraid of him and literally believed that this would be their last journey. In any case, the father was certain at the end of the conversation that it was the informant who had killed his daughter, and that he wanted to get rid of them by suggesting they go into the mountains. And all because he spoke with a frighteningly threatening voice and told everything in such detail as if he had been there and seen everything with his own eyes. Jennifer's parents went to the police officers to express their suspicion, but no one wanted to listen to them because the investigators trusted Kimball, who had been working for them for a long time and had a certain level of trust. And this time, the parents had to take the investigation into Jennifer's disappearance into their own hands. The father ordered a small billboard with a photo of his daughter, which he set up near the nightclub where his daughter danced. In this way, they hoped to receive information, and it worked. In June 2006, Rob McLeod, the father of the missing Casey, happened to come across the story of Jennifer's father. He recognized his billboard and read it. The story of Jennifer's disappearance bore great resemblance to the story of his daughter's disappearance, so the man contacted him. In the course of the conversation, Rob McLeod learned some shocking facts. He heard the name of Scott Kimball, which had been mentioned by Jennifer's parents. Rob also suspected that Scott had something to do with Casey's disappearance, so they arranged a meeting to go over all the details and work together on the investigation. Later, they met the father of the missing Len Emery and also worked with him. Scott was also involved in their case. After that, Rob met with his ex-wife, Lori. He immediately asked her whether there had been other cases of strange behavior by her husband and mysterious disappearances of people during her time together with Scott. The woman quickly remembered that in 2004, Scott's uncle Terry Kimball had also disappeared. She also found that strange. After that, the families of the missing had a big trump card in their hands with which they could turn to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They reported to the office in Denver and shared their suspicions regarding the perpetrator, Scott Kimball. The relatives were sure that he was behind the disappearance of the women. Finally, the law enforcement officers listened to them and agreed that there were too many peculiarities in these cases, and all the threads led to Scott. So the agents reacted and began investigating instead of ignoring the whole series of disappearances. The investigations officially began only in the fall of 2006. In all these cases, the investigation revealed that Scott Kimball was driven by greed. The man wanted money, attention, and power. At that time, he was still in prison awaiting his trial for fraud. The investigators began talking to an informant from the Central Bureau of Investigation who was willing to show them the most sophisticated cat-and-mouse game they had encountered in their entire career. Scott lied constantly to confuse investigations. In one of his stories, he said that his uncle had fled to Mexico with a dancer after winning the lottery. When checking this information, the investigators found that he had not won anything and no payment had been made to him. They also found out that the uncle had some money before his disappearance. The uncle had earned some money after the divorce. The man constantly carried a briefcase with him containing several $1,000s that he had gotten his hands on. This seems to be the cause of his death. The second victim in chronological order was the dancer Jennifer Markham. She and Scott found out about each other when he was in the same cell as her boyfriend. It was in 2002. He saw pictures of the beauty and fell in love with her almost immediately. He began to assure his cellmate that he would like to help her find a normal, well-paying job, and the cellmate gave him the opportunity to help. But his real motive was to possess this woman entirely. At that time, Kimball convinced law enforcement that Jennifer and his cellmate were part of a criminal plan. He claimed to have uncovered a criminal gang involved in contract killings. Amazingly, the FBI agents believed the criminal. He was released in December 2002 and began working as an informant. Only 2 months later, Jennifer disappeared. During the investigation, the police officers spoke with Steve Ennis, who was Jennifer's boyfriend. He reported at the time that he suspected Scott and also believed that Scott was involved in the disappearance of the girlfriend of another ex-convict. His name was Steve Hawley, who was together with Len, and she had also disappeared. The investigators tried to contact her, but since 2003, this was no longer possible due to her disappearance. The investigators realized that she was another victim of Kimball. Len's photo was found on Scott Kimball's laptop. However, the law enforcement authorities had no bodies of the missing, no evidence, and no confession from the perpetrator himself. They continued to literally extract information from him, piece by piece. In April 2008, Scott finally gave a small clue. According to him, he was with a woman who died of an overdose of illegal substances in a national forest in Colorado. The police had a parking receipt indicating that Scott Kimball was in Walden, Colorado, near the national forest, on the weekend when Casey McLeod disappeared. It seems that he disposed of bodies in the area. The investigators then contacted the Forest Service and tried to find out whether bodies had been found there and whether they had received similar reports. The dispatcher replied that there had been no such incidents, except for what had happened in the winter. A skull had been found there. After investigation, it turned out to be Casey McLeod. However, no further remains could be found, and the cause of death could not be determined based on the skull alone. From that point on, Casey's disappearance was finally treated as a murder case, and Scott became the main suspect. Scott Kimball was born in 1976 in Boulder, Colorado, into a broken family, which made his childhood extremely turbulent. He survived his parents' divorce and even had his first encounter with the police as a teenager when he fired a gun through his neighbor's window. When Scott and his brother moved into their grandmother's house, the neighbor raped them both, leading to Scott's psychological problems. He even tried to take his own life and shot himself in the head at the age of 23, but he was lucky. The bullet only grazed his skull, and paramedics saved his life. At the beginning of his criminal career, Scott was involved in several petty crimes, including credit card fraud. In his private life, he was unlucky. Scott married Larissa Huns in 1993. The couple had 2 sons, but the marriage could not be saved due to constant quarrels and conflicts. They divorced in 1997. Scott believed that the whole world was against him, and this was, as psychiatrists later believed, the main reason for the murders. The ex-wife later accused Scott of stealing from and raping her, but she failed a lie detector test, and her accusations were considered invalid. Nevertheless, he was soon arrested and imprisoned for fraud. After escaping from prison, Scott returned to his ex-wife to rape her a second time, although the rape report was never filed. When Scott was arrested in Alaska, he stood trial in connection with his escape. During his detention in Alaska, Scott convinced the FBI that he would spy for them, so he got away with a light sentence. However, this deal was extremely reckless because, after his release, Scott committed 4 heinous murders. Casey's mother, Lori, was shocked, for she had literally married the monster that had taken her daughter away from her and didn't even notice it for a long time. How could this man charm her with his charisma? But as everything came to a head, she divorced him. Lori believed that it was Scott who had planted illegal substances on the day she last saw her daughter, that he had started the argument because he knew that the impulsive Casey would leave the house and he would get a good opportunity to bring her to her senses. So far, however, the entire case was based on speculation. There was too little evidence against him, all of which could be dismissed as circumstantial and easily refuted with the help of a good lawyer. An extensive collection of evidence was required before the informant of the Federal Bureau of Investigation could be brought to trial. That changed in 2008 when Kimball was sentenced to 48 years in prison for his recent fraud and assault offenses. But the prosecutors wanted more. They wanted to hold him accountable for all the brutal murders he had been involved in. But that required more than just interrogations. So the law enforcement authorities offered the man a deal with a reduced sentence if he would lead the police officers to the bodies of his victims. Scott finally agreed, and in the winter of 2009, showed the locations in the canyons of eastern Utah where the remains of Kaiser and Jennifer could be found. A thorough search led the police officers to a single boulder lying in the canyon. Under the rock were found bones and a hairpin of a woman with a torn strand of hair. The forensic examination revealed that these were the remains of Kaiser, who had been lying on the lonely rock ledge for 6 years. Among the remains was also a bullet that was identical to one fired from Scott's weapon. The intruder then helped to discover the body of his uncle in this canyon, who had also been shot. However, there was a problem in searching for Jennifer's remains. The investigators searched the entire area indicated by Scott, but found nothing. It turned out that the perpetrator's story about the whereabouts of Jennifer Markham's body was entirely fabricated. Scott wanted to convince the police that he was not lying and telling the truth about Jennifer Markham's burial, and even went so far as to undergo a lie detector test. He suspected that her body had been found by someone and re-hidden. However, the investigators believed that he deliberately prevented them from finding Jennifer's body because he had a special connection to her. In any case, in October 2009, the families of the killer's victims gathered in court. Finally, they could see the Hannibal who had taken their daughters' lives from the front row. The parents of the murdered testified and complained to Scott that he had ruined their lives. Scott Kimball was charged with second-degree murder. As part of a deal, he pleaded guilty to being involved in the murders of 4 people. He was sentenced to 70 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole in 2082. In his case, he will probably spend the rest of his life behind bars. In his speech, the perpetrator emphasized that he was not a serial killer. Scott admitted that he had only killed his uncle Terry and was only indirectly involved in the death of the women. He spoke in riddles about his female victims and did not explain what it all meant. The defendant referred to them as part of a mechanism, but did not reveal what exactly it was and how it worked. It was clearly some kind of criminal plan. The circumstances suggested that they had died of an overdose, but there were great doubts about that. Scott had even said that he had help but refused to reveal which other people were involved in the events. What the prosecutor had not anticipated was that the reason for this was simple. They simply did not exist. According to forensic psychiatrists, the man had killed the women due to an unhealthy sexual attraction. For this reason, it was difficult for him to talk about it, and he also did not consider it murder. The search for Jennifer Markham's body continued even after Scott's conviction. However, her body was never found. The sons of Scott Kimball gave an interview and openly revealed that their father tried to kill one of his sons, Justin, when he was 10 years old. His father hit him on the head with a metal object, and he lost consciousness. Then he drove him to the hospital and tried to throw him out of the car at full speed. The boy suffered severe injuries and was placed in an artificial coma, which he miraculously survived. When Justin came to and told the story, no one believed him. The now adult son realized that his father wanted a payout from his life insurance, or $50,000 from the boy's insurance policy. He was the sole beneficiary. Scott Kimball is suspected of being involved in several other women's murders that were committed in Colorado at that time. According to the police, he may have killed 25 people. The bodies of some of the victims were found with a series of knots on a rope that resemble the knots Kimball used in the murder of his Uncle Terry. One of the women was wrapped in a baby blanket identified by Scott's son. Thus, the investigators are confident that there were many more victims. Thank you for watching and take care of yourself. Paula Andrea Salazar Bermudez was born in September 2015 in Venezuela. Her mother, Andreana Bermudez Milan, was from the city of Maturin in the state of Monagas, and her father, Leonardo Salazar, from Tucupita, a city in the state of Delta Amacuro. 1 year after Paula's birth, in September 2016, the couple decided to immigrate to Ecuador with their child to find a better life for themselves and their daughter. 1 month after moving to Quito, the capital of Ecuador, the family's relationship deteriorated for a number of reasons. Adriana initiated the separation from Leonardo and soon decided to move to Cuenca, the third largest city in Ecuador, taking Paula with her. The mother of Adriana's best friend lived in Cuenca and kindly offered to let her and the girl stay with her until they could find another place to live and work. Leonardo, the girl's father, decided to return to Venezuela, to his hometown Tucupita, in view of the separation and other circumstances, and after some time he emigrated again, this time to Trinidad and Tobago. By that point, Leonardo had already long been disabled. His left arm was completely paralyzed following a motorcycle accident he had suffered at a young age. Because he was unable to use his left arm, he apparently found it difficult to get a good job, even in the Ecuadorian capital. After Adriana moved to Cuenca, she almost completely cut off contact with Leonardo, notifying him only once that she had taken a job on a farm in the town of Tapacundo. A few months after her separation from Leonardo, Adriana began a new relationship with a man named Washington Andres. Andres was Ecuadorian, and more importantly, he owned the farm where Adriana worked. He grew up in a wealthy family. When Paula was about 1.5 years old, Adriana moved in with him, and on the 7th of April 2019, Andres and Adriana had a child together. With the arrival of the baby, the family became happier and more united. But everything changed on the 27th of March, 2020, when an event occurred that turned the lives of everyone involved upside down. At that time, the family was doing well and enjoying each day and how smoothly things were going on the farm. On one of those seemingly happy days, Andres took Paula and drove her to a flower plantation. On the way, the girl became very ill, feeling dizzy and complaining of nausea. Andres had no choice but to stop at a public restroom. When he and the girl entered the restroom, Paula began vomiting again. The man locked her in by herself for a few minutes while he went back to the car to change, since the girl's clothes were dirty. When Andres returned, he found Paula with her head in the toilet bowl. He immediately pulled her out, tried to give her first aid, and soon took her to Tapacundo Hospital. When the 4-year-old girl was handed over to the doctors, she showed no signs of life, and they declared Paula dead. After the on-duty doctors conducted an initial examination and assessed the girl's condition, they found inconsistencies in Andres's story. On first glance, they saw that the girl had bruises on her body and face that didn't match the foster father's account. Medical protocol in such cases requires the doctors to contact the police, and the situation itself suggested they do so. Shortly after the police arrived, Andres was arrested as a suspect in Paula's murder. Although Andres claimed Paula had drowned in the toilet bowl, the autopsy revealed something much darker. First, the examinations indicated that the girl had likely been dead for about 24 hours by the time she arrived at the hospital, which contradicted Andres's version of events. The foster father claimed he had given Paula first aid and performed CPR barely 20 minutes before bringing her to the hospital. The autopsy also showed that the girl had multiple broken ribs, several micro-injuries, a broken spine, and septicemia that caused her death. It turned out that Paula's death was no accident, as her small body had a large number of new and old injuries. Salazar, the girl's father, found out about Paula's death on the 30th of March, 3 days after the events took place. His mother, who was still in Venezuela, informed him of his daughter's death, calling him to give him the tragic news. She, in turn, had found out from one of Adriana's friends. After Leonardo left Ecuador and Adriana began a new relationship, she constantly cut off contact with him, so he remained unaware of what had happened to his daughter for 3 days. Until then, he could only see her in the photos sent by friends they shared with Adriana. What's more, Adriana blocked Leonardo on all social media, preventing him from communicating with Paula or maintaining contact with most of Leonardo's relatives. Nevertheless, Leonardo learned of his daughter's death. Andriana's family gave him a different cause of death, claiming that Paula had died from complications caused by COVID-19. This was when the pandemic-related quarantine was starting worldwide, but at that time, there were virtually no reported coronavirus-related deaths in the country. Leonardo was obviously highly suspicious that his daughter could have died of COVID-19, so he immediately began looking into statistics on deaths from the virus in Ecuador. These statistics were published on social networks, news portals, and some Ecuadorian websites. Leonardo immediately noticed that among the few recorded coronavirus deaths, there were no children. Leonardo's relatives helped him with his inquiries, and soon one of them sent him a newspaper article mentioning Andres's arrest on suspicion of killing Paula. Leonardo began calling Andriana every day. After 10 days, she finally decided to call him back. During this call, Andriana rather coldly informed Leonardo that Paula had died of COVID-19 and that she couldn't give him any more information because her lawyers had forbidden it. As a next step, Leonardo and an acquaintance set up a Facebook page in Paula's honor, as well as an Instagram profile called Justice for Paula. The posts triggered a major outcry on all social media platforms. The main goal was to bring those responsible for his daughter's death to justice. On the same day that Andriana called Leonardo, she went to the morgue to arrange her daughter's funeral. Although the prosecutor handling the case had asked for more time to investigate, the girl's funeral took place on the 10th of April, 2020, and it was not allowed for a second autopsy to be conducted on the little girl. Thanks to information shared on social media, Andriana's friends and people close to her contacted Leonardo and told him about the sad life Paula had led in the years before her death. They passed along the data they had, mostly based on individual recorded conversations, photos, audio recordings, and so on. According to witness statements, Paula had endured abuse from both her stepfather and her own mother since moving in with Andres. Andriana not only allowed her daughter to be treated this way, but was directly involved in it. Everyone said they only saw Paula happy and cheerful when she was playing alone. In the presence of her stepfather, the girl seemed depressed, behaved shyly, and became suddenly very fearful. At some point, the little girl told people she knew that her mother and stepfather hit her because she misbehaved. One day, she even admitted that Andres pushed her as a punishment and banged her head against the wall. Paula only referred to her stepfather as the monster and was surely very afraid of him. The little girl constantly had nightmares and, although still very young, already suffered from insomnia. To begin with, when the couple moved, the little girl, who was 2 years old at the time, had to sleep alone. She often cried herself to sleep, but no one bothered about it. Moreover, her mother and stepfather forced her to make her own bed, despite it being very large and difficult for the girl to handle alone. Andriana also taught her to cook starting at the age of 2, which was completely unreasonable. Paula had to prepare her own breakfast and dinner because her mother liked to sleep late in the morning and took a break from her child in the evenings, making no effort to care for her. She also didn't mind that Paula had to open and close a smoking oven by herself, which was quite dangerous. In the preschool where her mother had enrolled her, Paula constantly complained of leg and back pain and often said she couldn't walk. Her frequent complaints and the bruises on her body prompted her teachers to take her to the doctors at the local clinic. After an examination, the doctors concluded that the girl was likely being abused at home. The teachers called DINAPEN, the National Directorate of the Specialized Police for Children and Adolescents, to investigate the abuse in Paula's family. DINAPEN took on the case and decided to place the girl in a safe place during the investigation. On the 16th of October, 2019, Paula was temporarily entrusted to her uncle, Andriana's brother. The first hearing in the case, led by DINAPEN, was scheduled for the 4th of December, 2019. Unfortunately, the teachers who were supposed to testify as witnesses did not show up, for reasons unknown, so they couldn't attend the hearing. A new hearing was then set for the 27th of February, 2020, but again, Paula's teachers simply did not appear. The court was forced to dismiss all charges against the parents. Paula was then returned to her mother, and exactly 1 month later, on the 27th of March, she disappeared. The exact reason the teachers failed to show up for either hearing is still unknown. It is suspected that Andriana may have bribed them or somehow convinced them that the parents were not responsible for what Paula had been saying about them, despite the girls' obvious problems. After Paula's death, Andres was placed in a detention center while all investigative measures were carried out. However, he soon appealed and contested this decision. On the 12th of June, 2020, a hearing was held in which the judge defined the measure of restraint and considered the possibility of placing him under house arrest. During the hearing, which took place by video conference, Andres announced he would withdraw his appeal. At that time, Leonardo was still busy with a social media campaign, also asking his followers for financial support to travel from Trinidad and Tobago to Ecuador. He wanted to file a complaint against Andriana, Paula's mother, before it was too late. At that point, Andriana had not yet been charged and was at liberty. Fortunately, Leonardo obtained sufficient financial support, as well as free legal counsel from 2 Ecuadorian lawyers, Oswaldo Trujillo and Alejandro Herrera, who selflessly agreed to help him through the legal proceedings. Leonardo had to cross the border between Trinidad and Venezuela by sea, risking his life, and then travel from Maturin to San Cristobal, hiring private transfers, because the regular routes were suspended in Venezuela due to the pandemic, making them unavailable to him for traveling to Ecuador. As of the 15th of March, 2020, all sea and land borders in Venezuela were closed due to the pandemic, and for the following months, there were only a few scheduled flights to 4 or 5 countries. Once Leonardo arrived in the state of Táchira, he had to cross the border into Colombia through rough terrain, which is already dangerous, then took a bus to the city of Ipiales, traveling through hills and plains to reach the Rumichaca Bridge, the border between Colombia and Ecuador. He then took a taxi to Quito. On the 30th of June, he met with his lawyer. Immediately after arriving, the father of the deceased girl filed a complaint against his ex-partner, who was also considered a suspect in Paula's murder. On the 6th of July, 2020, Andriana was charged. She appeared in court, which decided not to place her in pre-trial detention, determining instead that it would be sufficient for her to sign in and pledge not to leave the country, as well as report to judicial authorities twice a week. Consequently, both Andres and Andriana were charged with murder, which according to Ecuadorian criminal law carries a maximum sentence of about 13 years in prison. In November 2020, the first hearing in the case took place, during which the judge confirmed that a trial against the defendants would proceed. At that time, no specific start date for the trial had been announced. During the hearing, Leonardo's lawyers expressed concern that Andriana might flee. She had previously attempted suicide by taking pills. They also requested that she be fitted with an electronic ankle bracelet. The judge granted the lawyer's request and reduced the number of days she had to appear before the judicial authorities from 2 per week to 1 per week. A few days later, however, Andriana requested a review of the decision requiring her to wear the electronic bracelet. On the 16th of November, another hearing was held to reconsider these measures. Undoubtedly, these details delayed the process, but fortunately, the judge set a date for the trial to begin in December. There was not much media coverage about the trial of Andres and Andriana, although most of the information made its way onto social media in one way or another. Because of the pandemic's prominence in the news, some information went unnoticed. The trial began on the 14th of January, 2021, with Andriana still subject to alternative measures rather than detention. Andres remained in the Cotopaxi Regional Prison. The trial took place behind closed doors, with no media present. Some participants joined the proceedings via video link. During the trial, the doctor who performed the girl's autopsy provided the judges with details about Paula's injuries that were previously unknown. According to the doctor, almost all of the girl's spinal discs had come loose. Some of her ribs had been broken and had grown back together on their own, meaning she had previously fractured them and they had healed by themselves. She also suffered from ingrown nails, bruises and scratches on her face and body, fluid in her lungs, scars on her head, and a ruptured colon. According to the report, these last injuries caused an infection that gradually developed into septicemia and ultimately led to her death. The autopsy also confirmed that Paula had already been dead for about 24 hours when Andres took her to the hospital. The many internal and external injuries reflected the extent of the cruelty the little girl was subjected to, as well as the negligence of her caregivers, who never once took her to the doctor. Paula was also malnourished, underweight, and too small for her age. Mineral and nutrient deficiencies were a factor. Regarding the injuries Paula sustained, Andriana tried to convince her friends and relatives that the child had many psychological problems that led her to harm herself in order to get attention. According to Paula's mother, after the birth of her younger brother, Paula started missing her parents' attention, stopped sleeping at night, and cried to manipulate them. The trial revealed that Paula had supposedly been instructed in October 2019 to remain under her uncle's guardianship, though she actually continued living with her parents and only spent some nights at her uncle's house. In other words, the measures taken by Dinapen did not achieve their intended effect. Investigations showed that the girl began to suffer in 2017, just a few months after Leonardo left Ecuador, because of the abuse she suffered, which very likely started as soon as Andriana became involved with Andres. More than 40 witnesses for the prosecution took part in the trial, testifying that Paula had endured at least 3 years of abuse during her short life. At the final hearing before the verdict was announced, Andriana declared that she alone was responsible for the abuse. She admitted that she had beaten Paula with a belt and sometimes with her fists. By saying this, the girl's mother attempted to shield her husband from blame. She stated directly that he was innocent, that he had nothing to do with it, and that he had never treated Paula badly. Andriana also said that she punished her daughter for causing problems with her new partner. Separating from her new partner would mean living on the street again and losing the financial stability she only had with him. Her daughter was her last priority. When the judges learned about Paula's living situation, they also grew concerned about the fate of Andriana's son, the child she had with Andres. But it can be said with certainty that this child, unlike Paula, was never mistreated. Andres exercised his right to remain silent and never commented on the incident after his arrest. On the 3rd of February, 2021, the trial for the brutal murder of Paula concluded, and the couple received a verdict. Both defendants were found guilty of the girl's murder. The highest sentence for this offense under Ecuadorian criminal law is 13 years. Initially, Leonardo's lawyer and the prosecution had demanded the maximum sentence, but the presiding judge chose to add an aggravating circumstance, namely that Paula was only 4 years old and therefore unable to defend herself against her attackers. As a result, the judge sentenced Andriana Bermudez and Andres Amar to 17 years and 4 months in prison. Under Ecuadorian law, convicts have 3 days after sentencing to file an appeal, and the couple immediately did so. Although Andriana was sentenced to 17 years and 4 months in prison, she remains free on bail to appear in court, having taken advantage of her right to appeal. Now the higher court must confirm her prison sentence. In the meantime, she continues to meet the original measures imposed. This is not the case for Andres, because he had been arrested at the hospital when he arrived with the deceased girl. The fact that Andriana is still free undoubtedly causes public outrage and anger, especially for Leonardo, who fears she may try to evade justice. Thank you for watching and take care of yourself. Among modern internet users, there is hardly anyone who has never tried taking selfies. Millions of such pictures end up in social media feeds. Most of the time, these photos show a happy person in front of a beautiful landscape, a group of friends, or proudly on their own, showing followers what they are currently doing. Amanda Taylor, a young 24-year-old woman, took selfies after committing a gruesome crime. Taylor wanted to show the world that she felt no remorse and that she still does not regret anything. In 2015, the Blue Ridge Parkway, a scenic road over 720 kilometers long in the United States that runs through the Appalachian Mountains in Virginia and North Carolina, was the backdrop for a white Jeep speeding along. Suddenly, it disappeared from view and turned onto another, even more remote road, where there were essentially no houses, no stores, no oncoming cars, and no signs of any kind. The Jeep pulled over, and a pretty woman got out on the driver's side, holding a pistol in her hand. She walked around the car and opened the door on the passenger side, where her boyfriend and accomplice, 33-year-old Shan Ball, was seated. His condition was dire. He would briefly regain consciousness and then pass out again. Amanda lifted her weapon, pointed it at Shan, and openly told him how she had used him, how their friendship was nothing more than a means to an end. After confessing the unpleasant truth about their real relationship, she felt liberated and pulled the trigger with ease. She dragged his body to the roadside, got back in the car, turned around, and drove off in an unknown direction. It did not take long for Shan to be found, and for the police to determine that the man at the roadside was a wanted criminal who had been on the run after committing a massacre with his girlfriend, the 24-year-old Amanda Taylor. Before he was discovered, a serious manhunt was already underway, and law enforcement now realized that Amanda was capable of shooting even her own accomplice. Nobody knew what else this woman on the run might have done. Amanda Taylor was born on the 27th of March, 1991, in Christiansburg, Virginia, into a very wealthy family. Her childhood could have been described as pleasant, had it not been for a rebellious phase in her teenage years. During that time, her family had a great deal of trouble. Taylor and her best friend, Ray, repeatedly drew the attention of the police. They had met when they were 12 years old, became friends immediately, and started spending a lot of time together, getting into various kinds of mischief. In 2005, they ran away from home, got into trouble, and it is unknown how things might have turned out if they had not been caught and returned home. In 2006, Amanda staged an outburst at Christiansburg High School, which she attended at the time. She yelled at the entire class about how much she hated the institution and that one day she would pick up a gun and kill everyone. The teachers could not calm the agitated Amanda on their own, so they called the police. Taylor was taken to the station for disorderly conduct, but that was exactly what she wanted, because she was sick of going to school. Amanda kept having problems. In that same year, 2006, she stole her mother's car and ran away from home again with her friend Ray. The high school girls were caught once more and charged with underage possession of alcohol. Shortly thereafter, they were arrested again for assaulting a young man, who turned out to be Ray's boyfriend, with whom they had some kind of disagreement. No charges were filed against the girls, and they were reprimanded for their inappropriate behavior and released. In 2011, Amanda and some acquaintances were charged with the production of illegal substances. In a twist of fate, it was precisely these substances that would later drive Amanda on a criminal hunt. Thus went the youth of this once promising girl, Amanda Taylor. Her friendship with Ray endured, and together they caused a lot of trouble for their families. At that time, they had little interest in the peace of mind of their parents, because teenagers often do not consider the consequences of their behavior. When Amanda was about 15 or 16, she met a man named Rex Taylor, who would later become her husband. He was 2 years older, and from the moment they met, they were practically inseparable. Friends said they seemed bound by an invisible thread and simply could not be apart. Many people thought they made a truly great couple. Amanda and Rex, as the young woman herself said, had shared but unusual interests. They saw beauty in what others considered dark or evil. The young couple loved monsters and madmen, and often imagined themselves in those roles. Their mutual fascination with criminals brought them closer, and they found they could not live without each other. Rex repeatedly wrote letters to infamous criminals in prison. Whenever one of them wrote back, he would post the response on social media and boast about this unusual acquaintance. He and Amanda amassed a whole collection of items from various crimes and proudly showed them to their friends. Rex was also interested in how the brain of a serial killer worked, so he often watched true crime stories. He even developed something of a friendship with a death row inmate named Paul. Rex and Paul would call each other and text regularly. Taylor changed usernames on social media for her new friend, shared personal stories with him, and in early 2014, she gave an interview about this strange friendship. Amanda became pregnant while still in high school. It is not easy to become a mother at such a young age, to take care of a baby, and to keep going to school. Ultimately, Amanda dropped out to take care of her baby son. After her son's birth, she had a daughter. Her dropping out was confirmed, but that did not mean she became a caring mother who stayed home with the children. Instead, the arrival of her son and daughter served as an excuse to leave school, because Amanda did not really want to be a mother. The birth of her son and daughter merely confirmed the seriousness of her relationship with Rex. The two loved each other and could not imagine being apart. At the same time, they were always fighting, breaking up, reconciling, accusing each other of cheating, and experiencing every kind of difficulty. But there was one problem in this relationship that outweighed all others: medication. The Taylors could have been a wonderful, truly happy family if the relationship had not suffered under Rex's addiction. He became addicted to pills at a very young age. According to Amanda, he tried them for the first time when he was 12, having gotten them from his father, Charles Taylor. Soon, the teenager was heavily addicted, which would later become the stumbling block in his family life with Amanda. Their relationship was a roller coaster. At times, they were nearly perfect together. Then there would be screaming, crying, and accusations. Although Rex was dependent on synthetic substances, he was overall a great, caring man. He loved Amanda and their children, but his bad habit gradually escalated, and the consequences became irreversible. Matters came to a head when Rex drove under the influence of these illegal substances with the kids in child seats in the car. That was the last straw for Amanda. It happened in April 2014. The young woman decided she had had enough. She told her husband that she loved him and did not want to leave him for a second, but that for now he had to go. Amanda was ready to take him back any time if he decided to stop taking pills. Rex had no choice but to return to his father, Charles Taylor. The day before, Amanda had spoken to her father-in-law, urging him not to supply Rex with prescription drugs under any circumstances. She pleaded for his help with Rex's therapy so they could be a normal family again. In reality, however, Charles's house turned out to be the worst possible place for Rex to go. Father and son popped pills like friends, partied, and lived together in the home of Charles's paralyzed father, who had access to prescription medication. Rex helped Charles around the house, and in return received his dose. Rex's addiction grew worse and worse. If he missed even one pill, his whole body seemed to shut down and he would vomit. As Amanda later admitted, her father-in-law, Charles Taylor, was not a bad person. He was kind to her and good to his grandchildren, but he did not care at all about what was happening to his son Rex. Instead of trying to help him recover or free him from his addiction, Charles kept supplying him with pills. Although acquaintances described the 59-year-old as kind and generous and very respected in the community, Amanda blamed him for Rex's fate. At the end of April 2014, Rex died. Their young son was supposed to celebrate his 7th birthday that day, waiting in vain for his father. Charles Taylor discovered his son Rex in the barn. The saddest part is that Amanda's friends, Ray and Johnny, were the first to learn of Rex's death. They lived near his grandmother, and that morning the elderly woman ran into them outside her house, telling them the tragic news. Ray immediately called Amanda to confirm that it was true and to offer condolences. But it turned out that her friend did not even know she had become a widow that day. Amanda called Charles's number and learned the bitter truth about her husband. The inconsolable woman lost control, became hysterical, and could not stop. From that day on, Amanda Taylor was not the same person. Her whole world changed in a second, as though she too had died the moment she learned her beloved Rex was gone. Amanda would have followed her husband without hesitation, but she still had something to do. Her best friend, Ray, stayed by her side to ensure she did not do anything rash. She and Rex had been together every day for 8 years and had separated only a month earlier because of his addiction. They had separated over nothing but knew their hearts would be forever bound. They had 2 wonderful children and were even celebrating a birthday for one of them together. It is impossible to imagine the heartbreak and guilt Amanda felt. All her pain and anger over the loss of her beloved were directed at his father. Amanda blamed Charles for Rex's death because of the pills, while Charles blamed his daughter-in-law for leaving his son during the hardest time of his life when he needed her most. Charles arrived at Rex's funeral with a gun, looking for Amanda, who could not even properly say goodbye to her husband. Rex had long battled depression and pill addiction. This struggle had lasted a long time, and if Charles had not supplied his son with pills, events might have taken a very different turn. Every addiction is an illness, and the decision to seek treatment or not always lies with the person in question. Rex chose not to undergo therapy and knew that by doing so, he was losing Amanda and the children. He could not bear it. The grieving widow mourned for a long time. She did not just mourn, she was also angry. According to Amanda, it was Rex who taught her how to take another person's life. This was a desire that arose in her after his death, and she simply could not move on. Rex's interest in criminals and serial killers had rubbed off on Amanda, so everything the young woman did later, she claimed, was just an excuse to make her late husband proud. Amanda insisted that Rex was her motivation in her darkest moments. Incidentally, the death row inmate Paul, with whom Taylor had become friends, called Amanda after Rex's death and sent her $1,000. So she also thought Paul was a great guy and a family friend, despite his grave crime. Amanda and Rex's shared passion for killers and criminals had a deep effect on her. Their favorite video was one in which teenagers brought guns to school and started a shooting. Most online viewers got goosebumps just watching it, but Taylor found it entertaining. It was clear she had some very dark thoughts and was headed towards something terrible, but no one stopped her. She and Rex had once been obsessed with a crazy movie and imagined continuing its crime spree in real life. But fate had not given them that opportunity. So Amanda decided that, since Rex was gone, she needed a new partner. That partner was Shan Ball. Shan rented a room from Ray and her husband, Johnny, and was even living in their basement. The man had been in love with Amanda for a long time and would have done anything for her, but she was not interested in him in the least. Taylor only used him. Whenever she granted him the slightest bit of attention, she demanded even more from him in return. Amanda enjoyed the fact that she could control Shan and keep him around for her convenience. On the 27th of March, 2015, Ray, Johnny, and Shan were spending time with Amanda because she was celebrating her 24th birthday. It was a very difficult day for her, being the first birthday in 8 years without Rex. She and her husband used to have their own private birthday celebrations, so her friends tried their best to distract her, cheer her up, and perhaps even help her enjoy herself a little. Everything seemed fine until Amanda decided she wanted to visit Rex. Ray and Johnny immediately realized this was a bad idea. They knew she was emotionally fragile at that moment, and that going to her husband's grave would only make things worse. There was also a knife in her purse. Mixing depression, a knife, and her husband's grave could lead to anything. The friends feared Amanda would lose it, either by attacking them or harming herself, which was exactly what happened. Taylor collapsed on Rex's grave in hysterics, pulled out the knife from her purse, and said she wanted to join her husband immediately. It was a good thing that Shan and Johnny managed to grab her arm in time. They forced Amanda back into the car and drove her to her mother's house at around 3:30 a.m. They assumed their friend had calmed down, but as soon as Amanda was outside, the drama began again. She broke free, started wielding the knife once more, and shouted that it was her and Rex's day and they should be together. If anyone tried to stop her, she would not only go alone but take her children with her. At the time, her son was 7, and her daughter was only 2. This did not mean she did not love the little ones. She simply believed in that moment that by doing this, they would all be reunited with Rex. The woman's family members had no choice but to call the police. Amanda was apprehended and taken to a hospital, but due to her behavior, she was transferred to St. Albans Hospital, a mental health and substance abuse center in Christiansburg. She had already been admitted there twice before at a younger age for anger issues. This time, she told doctors she needed help because she might harm herself or others, and that she would kill herself upon release. She even named a specific person, Charles Taylor. Amanda's mother and her friend Ray called the hospital to tell the doctors that Amanda absolutely needed treatment, or else she really would do something terrible. Her family begged the doctors to do everything in their power to keep her at the clinic. However, after less than a week in the psychiatric ward, Amanda was discharged. Instead of inpatient treatment, she was prescribed a bunch of pills to take at home. Of course, she did not take any of them. The young woman called Ray and said she was coming over. As much as Ray cared about her friend, she understood that Amanda was a threat. She called Amanda's mother and stepfather and asked them to pick her up from the hospital, but they did not want her in their home either. During her time in the clinic, they had spoken with social services and secured papers for custody of Amanda and Rex's children. With nowhere else to go, the only option was Shan Ball, who had a crush on Amanda. Everyone hoped that for a while, he would take care of her, especially since everyone else, even her own mother, had turned her away, and Amanda had lost custody of her kids. So it was left to Shan. However, Amanda was harboring a dark plan. Shan, who was smitten with her, happily ran to her side. He even skipped work just to be near this woman, but their partnership would bring nothing but misery. When Ray found out that Shan and Amanda were planning a trip, she warned her friend about potential problems, but the man convinced her that he and Taylor were only going to his parents' house. On the 2nd of April, 2015, Shan Ball and Amanda spent the night in a motel, and on the 3rd of April, they really did drive to his parents' house so Shan could pick up some clothes and personal belongings. His mother said later that the two were in a great mood and that Amanda seemed very nice, though they hardly spoke. After the couple left, Shan's stepfather discovered that 2 guns were missing from the gun safe. He noticed it by chance because the drawer was apparently not locked properly. Shan must have taken the weapons and failed to close the drawer. Then, the young pair set out to put their mutual plan into action. Since Ray had confiscated the knife Amanda had threatened people with on her birthday, Shan bought her a new one. This weapon would later be used in the terrible crime. On the 4th of April, around 9:30 p.m., a woman named Ruth, who was Charles Taylor's neighbor, went to his house to look after his paralyzed grandfather. Just moments later, she ran out in a panic and dialed emergency services. Ruth told the operator she had seen blood everywhere as soon as she turned on the living room light in her neighbor's house. The initial investigation into Charles's death was slow because the police had few leads. They checked Taylor's acquaintances, but could not find anyone with a motive or the intent to harm him. That same night, the phone rang in Amanda's mother's house. It was the kind of call no mother ever wants to receive. Amanda was on the other end, apologizing for everything she had ever done and saying she loved her very much, but that she had something terrible to do. Her mother, frightened, did not understand a thing. She had seen her daughter just that morning, having driven her to the supermarket to buy Easter baskets for Amanda's children because the next day was Easter. Now Amanda was calling, saying strange things. Her mother pleaded with her to come home to Christiansburg so they could work something out, but Amanda refused, explaining that she and Shan were heading to Pittsburgh. That was not the only call Amanda made that night. She also called her mother-in-law, Rex's mother, Melissa, to tell her she had done what she had to do. Melissa reminded Amanda to think of her children and not do anything foolish, to which the young woman replied that she would probably never see her kids again. Melissa already suspected what Amanda meant. She begged her not to hurt anyone else and to surrender to the police. Then she heard a mocking laugh and Amanda saying she would shoot her if the police tried to apprehend her. Shortly after these calls, security cameras caught Amanda and Shan buying handgun ammunition at a store, then fueling up at a gas station. They spent the night at a motel, already on the run, because everyone knew who had attacked Charles Taylor's house. In reality, Amanda Taylor had tipped off the police herself. While she was on the run, she posted photos and updates about her crime on social media. Her prolific posts allowed investigators to track her and led them straight to the culprit when she least expected it. On a spring day in April 2015, around 3:27 a.m., Amanda and Shan arrived at Charles Taylor's house in Virginia. The number 327th referred to Rex's and Amanda's shared birthday, the 27th of March. Initially, the plan was to use a knife as the murder weapon. Rex's widow wanted her father-in-law to know it was her who had done this, and to feel both physical and moral pain. Shan hit the 59-year-old over the head with a crowbar. After he collapsed, Amanda picked up her weapon and started stabbing him, plunging the knife deep into Charles's body. She stabbed him a total of 31 times. The crime scene was unbelievably brutal. There were blood spatters everywhere, including on the pictures on the walls, and the sofa on which Charlie lay was soaked in blood. Amanda did not stop there. She did something even more horrifying. She took a photo of herself next to the body and posted it on her social media account, declaring she had a good reason to stab her father-in-law because he had destroyed her husband with addiction. She admitted she had not been the perfect wife, but this was the last good thing she could do for Rex. She asked the police not to look for her because otherwise someone else might die. She just wanted to reach Rex in peace and find rest. She also reached out to a crime blogger friend, asking him to publish her selfies that showed Amanda in front of Charles Taylor's lifeless body, still holding the bloody knife. Shocked, the blogger refused to post the pictures and turned them over to the police. Having just tasted blood, Amanda Taylor wanted more. After disposing of Charles Taylor, she and Shan fled. They escaped the crime scene without being noticed and headed toward Tennessee, spending the night in a cheap hotel in Bristol and continuing onward the next morning. Amanda and Shan quickly realized they were running out of supplies. They had no money, no food, and only a little gas left. Taylor gave her accomplice two options: kill as many people as they could to get money and valuables, or turn themselves in to the police. Without money, they would not get far. She was fully prepared to commit a massacre. At that point, the accomplices stopped for a break and to stretch their legs. Not far from the road, they saw two teenage girls traveling with their families for the holidays. Amanda drew Shan's attention to them and suggested it was the perfect moment to take action. She approached the girls and led them to the Jeep, planning for Shan to attack them. However, he refused to touch the teenagers because he did not want to further disappoint his mother. Apparently, he was very troubled by what he had done to Rex's father and could not bear the thought of committing more crimes. His reluctance infuriated Amanda, who climbed back into the Jeep and sped away recklessly. The young woman was beside herself with rage. She recalled all of Shan's talk before the murder and realized it had all been lies. He had boasted of being a former Navy Special Forces soldier and a combat veteran, but in truth he was a quiet, timid man who simply felt drawn to her. By that moment, he was in the passenger seat, having already written a farewell letter to his mother, swallowing pills to numb himself. Amanda had a bottle of anti-anxiety and antidepressant medication in her bag, given to her by the hospital. Shan took it out and drank the rest. At first, Amanda did not realize what was happening until she spotted the empty pill bottle on the car floor, which made her even angrier. She regretted getting involved with such a weakling. She then drove the Jeep onto the deserted Blue Ridge Parkway on the border between Virginia and North Carolina, looking for a place where no one would interrupt her. Amanda pulled over, picked up her gun, walked to the passenger side, and told Shan she had only been using him for the car, the money, and the gun he had stolen from his stepfather. After telling him exactly what she thought of him, she fired at his face. She then pulled his body out of the car and left it by the roadside, took a cold-blooded photo of his face, turned the Jeep around and drove off. Amanda felt inwardly satisfied that she had disposed of her accomplice. The only thing she did not know was that Shan Ball had survived and would soon make a statement. At the same time, Taylor tried to cement her image as a cold-blooded psychopath by sending more emails with creepy pictures of her deeds to the crime blogger, who passed them on to the police. Amanda bought a disposable phone and repeatedly called the blogger to get updates on her own case. By then, security camera footage from gas stations along the highway helped the police pick up Taylor's trail. She was spotted driving in North Carolina. It was the blogger who talked Amanda out of going on a shooting spree in town when she called him again. Finally, the police set up a spike strip to stop her car, and officers took her into custody. The traffic police pulled the suspect out of the car and handcuffed her. She wore a smug expression, almost proud of what she had done. The young woman was annoyed by the way the officers handled her, complaining that they did not let her park or unbuckle before taking her down. She demanded respect. In the interrogation room, Taylor acted as though she did not care about anything. She waived her right to remain silent and confessed to the massacre of Charles and Shan. However, when Amanda learned that her accomplice Sean was still alive, she deflated a little. It turned out she was not as good a shot as she thought. The bullet went through the man's jaw, knocking him out from the pain, but not causing lethal damage. The following revelation was chilling. Amanda told investigators she wanted the death penalty because she had tried to take a life. But when formal charges were brought against her, she pleaded not guilty regarding the death of her father-in-law. Doing so meant facing a trial, which was precisely what she wanted, as it would give her a chance to become famous and tell the world about her crimes. The accused stated she had felt happier than ever since Rex's death while stabbing the screaming Charles. She felt thrilled to unleash all her pent-up hatred, anger, and negative emotions on him. Amanda compared the act of killing her father-in-law to a happy memory. Ultimately, Taylor said she felt absolutely no remorse for what she did to Charles Taylor. She had done what she had planned from the very first minutes after Rex's passing. Stabbing Charles in the heart was as exciting as riding a roller coaster for the first time. The jury needed only 30 minutes to declare Amanda Taylor guilty of the premeditated murder of Charles Taylor. She was sentenced to life in prison. The judge called her the epitome of evil, which pleased her. Shan Ball recovered and accepted a plea deal that gave him a 60-year prison sentence, to be suspended after 41 years. Under the deal, he remains behind bars at the Craigsville Correctional Center in Craigsville, Virginia, while Amanda serves her time in another facility. Her best friend continues to manage all of Amanda's social media accounts. Together with her husband, Johnny, Ray looks after Amanda's son and daughter. Rex's mother, Melissa, said it was very painful for her to hear Amanda and others blaming her son. She said that despite his faults, her son was a kind, considerate, and caring man. Melissa was very close to Rex. The night before he died, they spent 4 hours together, during which he shared that he was a bit lost in life but also in high spirits. This made it even more difficult for his mother to cope with his death. She even sought psychological help. Several years have passed since the crime, yet true crime programs still recount the horrifying details of the case. Amanda Taylor has long been serving her sentence in a correctional facility, and for Rex's mother, the nightmare is far from over. The constant attention and misinformation her daughter-in-law spreads about her son only deepen her despair. Melissa said that because of Amanda's stories, many people think her ex-husband and her son were bad people, but that is not true. She insists that Amanda's stories are full of lies, made up to justify her own atrocities. People who knew Amanda and Rex say that Rex loved his father and would never have allowed his death to be so awful, nor would he have allowed his wife to resort to violence. It is also true that not everyone interested in true crime becomes deranged. In Amanda's case, her unusual hobby seems to have become an obsession. Amanda Taylor recently appealed her conviction and lost. She says she plans to appeal all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary. Apparently, life as an inmate is not as joyful as she had imagined. When a loved one dies of his own choices, one tries to find someone to blame. Many people cannot accept that it was the deceased's personal decision. Amanda Taylor decided to punish the person she saw as responsible for her husband's death with her own hands. She condemned herself to life behind bars and robbed her children of a mother. Thank you for watching, and please take care of yourselves. Late in the evening of the 22nd of October, 1989, the 11-year-old Jakob Erwin Wetterling, his younger brother Trevor, and his best friend Aaron Larson were riding their bicycles back from a supermarket when a masked man with a gun emerged from the bushes. He ordered all three to lie face down on the ground. The man asked each of them how old they were, and told everyone except Jakob to run off and not look back. That was the last time anyone saw Jakob alive. Our story takes place in St. Joseph, a small town in Stearns County, Minnesota, with about 7,000 inhabitants. Many young professionals live in St. Joseph, which is also home to the College of St. Benedict, a quarry park, and a nature reserve. It is a great place for anyone who enjoys spending time outdoors. Yet this small, seemingly idyllic town was the scene of a terrible crime in 1989. On the 17th of February, 1978, Jerry and Patty Wetterling, who lived in Long Prairie, Minnesota, welcomed a son named Jacob. The six-person family lived in their house in St. Joseph, a small town in central Minnesota. Jacob grew up in a home full of love and affection. He was athletic, sociable, loved music and animals, played on several of his school's sports teams, and was known for his sense of humor and kind nature. He was interested in the natural sciences, especially astronomy. He and his younger brother Trevor loved riding their bikes, and their parents gave them freedom to do so. They loved exploring nature, and they enjoyed feeling independent as they cycled around town. During one of those rides, something happened that would change the family's life forever. The 22nd of October, 1989, was a typical Sunday afternoon. Since everyone was free that day, the Wetterling family was about 30 kilometers from home. While the parents went out, their oldest son Jacob was supposed to watch over the younger children. Jacob's parents wanted the children to stay home that evening, but after they left around 9 p.m., Jacob called Patty and asked if he and Trevor could ride their bikes to the local Tom Thumb store to rent a movie. Patty refused because it was already dark and she did not want to leave the two younger sisters at home without supervision. The boys were disappointed by her answer but did not give up. Right after that call, they phoned their father Jerry and asked him for permission. They promised to be careful, wear reflective vests, and use flashlights on the short 1-kilometer ride to the video store. They also told him they had arranged for a 14-year-old girl from the neighborhood to watch their younger sisters while they rode to the store. Jerry understood how much they wanted to go and agreed. Jacob quickly called his best friend Aaron Larson, who came over, and the three boys set off to the video store. They arrived without incident and spent a few minutes choosing the movie. They decided on The Naked Gun on VHS, and after renting it, got back on their bikes for the ride home. They rode slowly because it was dark, using their flashlights to see the road. After a few minutes, they were stopped by a masked man who emerged from a driveway and blocked their path. Fear gripped them as he pointed a weapon at them and told them to get off their bikes. He ordered them to throw their bikes into a ditch beside the road and to lie face down on the ground. Then he asked each boy how old he was. After discovering that Trevor was the youngest, he ordered him to stand up slowly and run into the nearby woods, threatening to shoot if he made a sound or turned around. Trevor did as he was told. The masked man then turned to the other two boys and told them to lift their faces from the pavement and look at him. After a moment, it seemed he focused on Jacob, then told Aaron to stand up and run towards the woods, threatening him the same way he had threatened Trevor. Aaron did as instructed. He stood up, cast one last glance at his best friend Jacob, then turned and ran to the same woods Trevor had entered. That was the last time anyone other than the kidnapper would see Jacob alive. Although Trevor and Aaron were naturally terrified and traumatized, they knew Jacob was in far worse danger. They ran back to Jacob and Trevor's house. Since no adults were home, they told the neighbor's daughter, who was babysitting the younger sisters, what had happened. She could see they were visibly shaken, realized they were not joking, and understood something terrible had taken place. She immediately called her father, Merlin Juergensmeyer, and the police, who responded right away. Patty and Jerry hurried home when they got the call. They were shocked by what had happened to Jacob, but at least relieved that Trevor was safe. A large-scale search for Jacob began. Late in the evening of the 22nd of October, 1989, the 11-year-old Jakob Erwin Wetterling, his younger brother Trevor, and his best friend Aaron Larson were riding their bicycles back from a supermarket when a masked man with a gun emerged from the bushes. He ordered all three to lie face down on the ground. The man asked each of them how old they were, and told everyone except Jakob to run off and not look back. That was the last time anyone saw Jakob alive. Our story takes place in St. Joseph, a small town in Stearns County, Minnesota, with about 7,000 inhabitants. Many young professionals live in St. Joseph, which is also home to the College of St. Benedict, a quarry park, and a nature reserve. It is a great place for anyone who enjoys spending time outdoors. Yet this small, seemingly idyllic town was the scene of a terrible crime in 1989. On the 17th of February, 1978, Jerry and Patty Wetterling, who lived in Long Prairie, Minnesota, welcomed a son named Jacob. The six-person family lived in their house in St. Joseph, a small town in central Minnesota. Jacob grew up in a home full of love and affection. He was athletic, sociable, loved music and animals, played on several of his school's sports teams, and was known for his sense of humor and kind nature. He was interested in the natural sciences, especially astronomy. He and his younger brother Trevor loved riding their bikes, and their parents gave them freedom to do so. They loved exploring nature, and they enjoyed feeling independent as they cycled around town. During one of those rides, something happened that would change the family's life forever. The 22nd of October, 1989, was a typical Sunday afternoon. Since everyone was free that day, the Wetterling family was about 30 kilometers from home. While the parents went out, their oldest son Jacob was supposed to watch over the younger children. Jacob's parents wanted the children to stay home that evening, but after they left around 9 p.m., Jacob called Patty and asked if he and Trevor could ride their bikes to the local Tom Thumb store to rent a movie. Patty refused because it was already dark and she did not want to leave the two younger sisters at home without supervision. The boys were disappointed by her answer but did not give up. Right after that call, they phoned their father Jerry and asked him for permission. They promised to be careful, wear reflective vests, and use flashlights on the short 1-kilometer ride to the video store. They also told him they had arranged for a 14-year-old girl from the neighborhood to watch their younger sisters while they rode to the store. Jerry understood how much they wanted to go and agreed. Jacob quickly called his best friend Aaron Larson, who came over, and the three boys set off to the video store. They arrived without incident and spent a few minutes choosing the movie. They decided on The Naked Gun on VHS, and after renting it, got back on their bikes for the ride home. They rode slowly because it was dark, using their flashlights to see the road. After a few minutes, they were stopped by a masked man who emerged from a driveway and blocked their path. Fear gripped them as he pointed a weapon at them and told them to get off their bikes. He ordered them to throw their bikes into a ditch beside the road and to lie face down on the ground. Then he asked each boy how old he was. After discovering that Trevor was the youngest, he ordered him to stand up slowly and run into the nearby woods, threatening to shoot if he made a sound or turned around. Trevor did as he was told. The masked man then turned to the other two boys and told them to lift their faces from the pavement and look at him. After a moment, it seemed he focused on Jacob, then told Aaron to stand up and run towards the woods, threatening him the same way he had threatened Trevor. Aaron did as instructed. He stood up, cast one last glance at his best friend Jacob, then turned and ran to the same woods Trevor had entered. That was the last time anyone other than the kidnapper would see Jacob alive. Although Trevor and Aaron were naturally terrified and traumatized, they knew Jacob was in far worse danger. They ran back to Jacob and Trevor's house. Since no adults were home, they told the neighbor's daughter, who was babysitting the younger sisters, what had happened. She could see they were visibly shaken, realized they were not joking, and understood something terrible had taken place. She immediately called her father, Merlin Juergensmeyer, and the police, who responded right away. Patty and Jerry hurried home when they got the call. They were shocked by what had happened to Jacob, but at least relieved that Trevor was safe. A large-scale search for Jacob began. On the 13th of December, FBI investigators spoke with Jared Shire, a 12-year-old boy who had been assaulted and abducted in January 1989 in Cold Spring, a nearby town. They believed the perpetrator in Jared's and Jacob's cases might be the same person. The FBI met with Jared to create a sketch of the man who abducted him. On the 16th of December, agents interviewed a possible suspect named Daniel James Heinrich, who lived in Paynesville, about 48 kilometers from St. Joseph, where several abductions and assaults on young boys had occurred in recent years, not including Jacob and Jared. Heinrich denied knowing anything about either case. Investigators again found themselves with no further direction. About a month later, on the 12th of January 1990, they refocused on Heinrich and questioned him again. But this time, he gave them his tennis shoes and body hair samples to examine as evidence. 3 days later, on the 15th of January, Heinrich allowed the police to take an impression of the rear tires on his 1982 blue Ford hatchback so they could compare it to the tire tracks found at the scene. The next day, the 16th of January, the police learned Heinrich had owned a different car, a 1989 Ford Topaz, until March 1989. If he really had abducted Jared, this would have been the car he was driving at that time. The police managed to get access to that car, and when they placed Jared inside, he said it matched the vehicle in which he had been abducted, ranking it an 8 or 9 on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of similarity. On the 24th of January, Heinrich's home was searched, and several items were seized, including 2 police scanners, a bag used to carry them, frequency lists for the scanners, a pair of shoes, and clothing. On the 26th of January, Heinrich was compelled to appear at a police lineup. He arrived with 5 other white men, but Jared could not identify him as the man who abducted him. At that time, Jared only gave Heinrich a 4 out of 10. On the 9th of February, 1990, the FBI learned fibers found on Jared's clothing matched fibers from a car Heinrich had owned in January 1989. That same day, Heinrich was arrested in connection with Jared's abduction and assault, but continued to deny any involvement. Since the evidence against him was only circumstantial, he was released without being charged. Meanwhile, the number of agents working on Jacob's disappearance began to drop, as did the number of leads. Although the case technically remained open, since missing person investigations cannot be closed without resolution, it had reached a dead end. The entire search and investigation was a dreadful ordeal for Jacob's family. Despite extensive community and nationwide support, they were devastated by the loss of their son and brother, and as time passed, they began to doubt whether Jacob would ever return alive. At this point, Patty decided to help other families so they would not have to endure the same pain. On the 16th of January, 1990, she announced the creation of the Jacob Wetterling Foundation, aimed at educating the public about criminals who abduct children, how they operate, and what communities can do to prevent it. Even though the family had suffered immensely, they wanted to use that pain to help other families. Jacob's case also led to changes in several U.S. laws. In 1994, the Federal Jacob Wetterling Act was passed, marking an important moment in American history. It was a binding law that created a lasting legacy. Yet, despite everything the Wetterlings had done to help others, they still did not know what had happened to their son, and they continued to cling to the hope he might still be alive, though that hope diminished with each passing year. Then, a woman named Joy Baker, a mother of two, became aware of Jacob's case in 2010. One day, she got in her car and drove to St. Joseph, the site of his abduction. In 1989, when Jacob was abducted, Joy was 22 years old. As she sat there studying the location, she felt compelled to seek answers. At first, she had no idea where to start, so she did what she did best. She blogged. On the 23rd of October, 2010, she wrote a blog post called Jacob's Somewhere, marking 21 years since he had disappeared. She had no way of knowing it would begin a journey lasting several years and leading her to places she never imagined. She meticulously recorded every detail of her investigation in her blog, digging deeply into archived police files and newspaper articles in search of the smallest bit of information. She soon uncovered a series of mistakes in the original inquiry, leads that had gone uninvestigated, mishandled or lost evidence, and important witnesses who were never interviewed. Joy's research was so thorough that one blog post was devoted entirely to the weather and the phase of the moon on the night Jacob was taken, concluding that witnesses would have had difficulty seeing the abductor's vehicle because the moon had not yet risen. This meant the kidnapping took place in complete darkness. As Joy continued gathering information from more than 20 years ago, she was led to a man whose case connected with Jacob's, Jared Shire, who by this time was an adult in his 30s but still determined to find justice for the traumatic experience he had undergone as a child. Joy and Jared began working together. Their breakthrough came when they discovered a 1987 newspaper article describing a series of abductions and assaults on boys between 1986 and 1987, all carried out the same way by a masked man with a gun, all near the small town of Painesville, which is only about 30 minutes from where Jacob was abducted. Working with Jared, Joy located several of these former victims, who were now adults also seeking justice for what they had endured. Together, they mapped every attack in what they called the Painesville Attack Cluster. They were shocked by what they found and handed their information over to law enforcement. The police then reopened the long-dormant inquiry, and the case once again gained national attention. In 2015, 26 years after Jacob's abduction, the police restarted their investigation. They had DNA evidence from an unknown person on the sweater Jared wore during his abduction. On the 10th of July, 2015, they found that this DNA profile matched a 59-year-old man living in Painesville, none other than Daniel James Heinrich. He had been on the radar during the original investigation, as well as Joy's, but there had never been concrete evidence against him. Thanks to that DNA match, the case went to trial. On the 27th of October 2015, Special Agent Shane Ball filed a secret criminal complaint against Heinrich with Magistrate Jeffrey J. Keyes. By that time, the statute of limitations had expired for Jared's abduction, so Heinrich was charged with 20 other offenses, and he was arrested. Heinrich's attorneys arranged a plea deal that meant he would only be charged with those other offenses and not abduction or murder. In exchange, on the 31st of August 2016, he showed the police where Jacob was buried. His remains were found on a farm near Painesville, around 48 kilometers from St. Joseph, not far from where Heinrich had been living at that time. On the 6th of September, 2016, 27 years after Jakob's abduction, Heinrich appeared in court and admitted he had abducted, abused, and murdered Jakob on the 22nd of October, 1989. He also confessed to abducting Jared Shire that same year. In court, Heinrich said he had been driving along the road when he spotted 3 small boys. He turned into a driveway and waited for them to pass, then kidnapped Jakob and told the other 2 boys to run off. He drove Jakob to a place he knew, assaulted him, and then shot him. He left the body in a gravel pit in a remote area near a sewage canal on Pond Road, then went home for a few hours. After midnight, he returned to where he had left Jakob's remains and moved them to a spot north of where he had shot him, at a site under construction. He found an excavator, which he knew how to operate, and used it to dig a grave for Jakob. He later said that about a year afterward he revisited the grave, found it partially opened and could see Jakob's red shirt. Worried, he dug up as many remains as he could find, carried them across the highway to a rural farm in Painesville, and buried them there. In 2017, Heinrich was sentenced to 20 years in prison for his crimes. After the discovery of Jakob's remains and Heinrich's confession, the years-long investigation into one of the worst crimes ever committed in the United States finally came to an end. Jakob's remains were returned to the Wetterling family, who buried him in the Friends of Abba House St. John's Cemetery in Collegeville, Stearns County, Minnesota. Through her work on the case, Joy Baker became a close friend of the Wetterling family. She has said she never got involved for recognition or fame, only to help another mother through a terrible tragedy. Patty and Joy became friends and co-wrote a book about their story, titled Dear Jakob, A Mother's Journey. Patty gained prominence for her advocacy for children's safety and for helping pass a federal law. Jakob's family was devastated to learn definitively that he had died, and Patty has described the deep pain of learning about his final days, hours, and minutes. She said that for them, Jakob had been alive all that time until his remains were found. Although they now know for certain that their beloved son is gone, his legacy lives on through the foundation named after him and the federal law passed in his name. As long as there are people like Heinrich in the world, that law ensures they will not escape justice. Thank you for watching and take care of yourselves.